Now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome David Rubin, our good friend and the curator of Nature on the Edge.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Kellen and Bihl Haus Arts for presenting this exhibition and giving me and all these artists a wonderful opportunity to share our voices with you. And I also want to thank the sponsors of the exhibition, the Texas Commission on the Arts and the City of San Antonio Department for Culture and Creative Development. They made this exhibition and today's program possible. Now it's my pleasure to introduce three of San Antonio's fabulous artists. We have so many fabulous artists in this city, and three of them are going to have a conversation with me today. So we'll start down at the end with Margaret Craig. Margaret received a degree in biology, secondary education, a BS in art, and an MA in painting from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She later received an MFA in printmaking from the University of Texas, San Antonio. Margaret also invented tar gel pressless etching and has demonstrated that and other techniques at various conferences. She is often involved in trade portfolios and exhibitions locally and nationally, and she recently participated in the China Sanbao International Printmaking Exhibition and Symposium. Her day job is she's chair of painting, drawing, and printmaking at the Southwest School of Art.
Just printmaking.
Here in San Antonio, and her original degree in biology continues to inform her art, and we'll learn more about that. And then let's welcome Margaret. And sitting next to Margaret is Jayne Lawrence, who holds a degree in advertising design from the Colorado Institute of Art and a BFA and MFA from UTSA. Jayne is a multidisciplinary artist who works primarily in sculpture, ceramics, and drawing. Along with Leigh Lester, who we'll meet in a moment, Jayne was co-founder of the Cactus Bra Space, which was the longest-running alternative space for emerging artists in San Antonio from 1993 to 2013. Lawrence has held an artist residency at Sculpture Space in Utica, New York, and has exhibited at numerous institutions around the country. She is currently a senior lecturer in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas, San Antonio. So let's welcome Jayne Lawrence. And to my immediate right is Leigh Lester, who holds a BFA in painting from UTSA as well. Her current artwork focuses on the genesis of genetic modification and its after effects. And by the way, you can see the most recent work at a new exhibition at Ruiz Healy Art in town. Along with Jayne Lawrence, Lester was co-founder of the Cactus Bra Space, which we just mentioned. Lester's work, Leigh Ann's work, has been exhibited throughout the U.S. Her solo exhibitions have been extensive. She is the recipient of several awards, including the 2011 Hunting Prize, as well as a 2007 Artist Foundation of San Antonio grant. Leigh Ann has also participated in the 2008 Creative Capital Professional Development Program and the 2015-16 Blue Star Art Museum Berlin Residency Program. So very soon, Leigh Ann will be going to Berlin. So let's welcome Leigh Ann Lester. Okay, as you know, this exhibition features the work of artists who, each in their own unique way, are addressing various environmental issues. The format for this is I'm going to pose certain questions and then each artist will respond. We're going to have to pass the microphone down the line and back, so bear with us as we do that. I have given them these questions in advance so they've had some time to think about them. And I think we'll start at this end with Leigh Ann. Let me pose the question, the initial question, which is, how long have you been making art that addresses environmental issues? And what got you interested in this topic? Are you okay? You need a glass of water? It's right there. Are you ready? Okay, so what got, how long have this been of interest to you, environmental concerns? How did you get interested in the topic, and why do you consider it a worthy topic for an artist to investigate?
I got interested in it many years ago, reading news articles about genetic testing. I got interested in genetics
reading about genetic testings for family diseases, predisposed family diseases, how you could end up finding out if you inherited a particular aspect that could become a medical situation for you. And because of my interest in that, then as articles in the news started coming up about genetic modification in plants, it piqued my interest. And so I started focusing more on that than on the genetics of human beings. I started looking at the human beings being able to genetically modify plants through continuously progressing technology.
Were you interested in plant life to begin with? I know Margaret has a background in biology, for example. Was this a new interest for you, or have you always been interested in plants? We really need another microphone.
Chase the mic. One or two?
I'll yell.
Yes, exactly. Oh God, now I forgot my question.
All about who you already interested in?
Well, I like to garden, but the work that I did, I got my degree in painting, and the work that I did was always informed by the presumption about a particular visual of people, and so what was underneath that in reality. You assume you know something about somebody, but there's, you know, still waters run deep kind of thing. And so because of that sort of human kind of attachment to of that presumption, once I got interested in genetics and genetic modification in plants specifically, then I ended up kind of being intrigued by the idea of the stuff that was happening underneath the plants, even though morphologically, physically, they look the same, but they were, in fact, a great deal of futzing and turmoil underneath it. Does that answer the question, I think?
So basically, your initial interest came from some reading that you were doing.
Yes, yes.
But tell me why you think it's an important topic. Why as an artist? You know, what made you want to investigate it as an artist?
Can we go to someone else?
Yeah.
What made me want to investigate as an artist? Well, I mean, anything. I mean, Jayne and I were talking about this at lunch. What I particularly do, and I imagine most artists do, it takes a great deal of time to do what you do, and so you have to be passionate about it. And if you aren't, then you lose your interest and you go somewhere else. So I always have been intrigued through my life about that presumption of the visual and the reality of what's taking place within something. And so with the news articles intersecting with that already established curiosity, then I guess it sort of made it a perfect match or a perfect storm. To have it be something that's important to be seen in art, I think it could probably be said that even if my work wasn't about something that's sort of environmental and something that affects all of us, you always want people to stop and consider what you're saying in your work, and specifically I just may have a subject matter that happens to be relevant to a lot of people other than just me.
And other than just visual art?
Yes, exactly. So, did that answer?
Yeah, okay. Jayne.
I'm like, okay, what was the first question?
Well, how long have you been making art that addresses environmental issues? What led you to that?
I'm not sure I address environmental issues today directly. My work is about human behavior. I'm really interested in gender identity and roles, why people look at us and assume we're supposed to behave in a particular manner. And so I've used the natural world to kind of explore our own character. I think in school I once had a professor who said I should be a sociologist. So that behavioral thing that I'm interested in led me to kind of look through nature. So I could use insects right now as the instinctual kind of character. Why they do what they do, they behave in a way, they have a social order, particular social insects, ants, bees, whatnot. They have a social order that they do things instinctually. What we do, supposedly, we do it logically. And so I like to compare those things. But I think I started back in 1993 with a large piece that was a gigantic pear. It was made out of plywood, and it had 6-foot span stained glass dragonfly wings, and it would bounce up and down like a child's riding toy. And it took me 5 years to kind of explore the insects and that relationship to human beings. I diverted for a while and went into some narrative work with clothing for a while, but that's where it started.
I should point out, though, that when we're talking about nature in the context of this show, we're talking about human beings just as much as plants. And in fact, in the case of Joy Corso's work, for example, it's really about human beings and human culture and gender roles, as you were discussing. So for the rest of the discussion, we'll just keep that in mind. We're talking about nature in the broadest sense and not just plant life, but of course, Leanne focuses more on plants, you focus more on human behavior. And then Jayne, if you'll answer, share your thoughts about why you think it's important as an artist to be exploring what you do investigate.
It is a tough question. It's interesting. All right, I think that because I communicate best visually, that's the way it's easiest for me and has always been to communicate through objects or through pictorial. If I'm having a discussion with somebody, like I can't believe I don't have a piece of paper and a pen here, it's easier for me to draw a picture, write something down. Lectures in school were always taken with pictorial references. So it's who I am and how I communicate. And because communication is so important, being an artist gives me that avenue to talk to all of you and people out there and express ideas and learn more from other people. It's also open-ended. I think when you show a picture, and we can go specifically to work, but if you see an object on an open book without any words or pictures, what does it mean to you, and what does a book reference, and what is that in your history? So I get to find out more about you, and it's a way to have that kind of open discourse. Does that answer your question?
Margaret.
Okay. So, we probably don't need a repeat of the question.
Okay,
well, you can, yeah.
Well, obviously, you're trained in biology, so that was the starting point. But how did your art sort of veer in this direction of environmentally conscious work, and why is this important?
Yeah, I think I've probably always had. Well, I've always been interested in science. So I was interested in science, I was interested in art, and then when I got the degree in biology is kind of wonderful in how it interacts with art, because it's all about observation. It's all about looking at things and figuring things out and figuring out how things work, and especially in a visual manner, so that you can identify and figure out how things are growing and changing and all that. So I think that probably got it. That's where it started, and then you wind up when you're taking all those classes. And of course, I was at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is very liberal and environmental and kind of forthright, progressive place. So all the classes had lessons about being eco-minded and all the things that you're supposed to have there. So, not that was drummed into me, but I was, it was in a sense sort of preaching to the choir and giving me more fuel to go on with things. So I think I was just always interested in the topic.
And why is it important to do it as an artist?
Well, I think being an artist is just so important to me and I almost don't know why, it's just something I have to do. If I don't do it, I go a little nuts. And so it was just a natural outlet. And if I'm going to do it, I want to speak to people. I think, as everybody here does, it's a way of speaking visually and just kind of getting it out there, and maybe working through some of your own ideas, because I work, sort of as a process. Everything is kind of about the process. So you're kind of figuring out your ideas as you're going along, and that's just the way I work. And I don't know.
But did you really want to be a scientist at one time?
Well, way back when I thought I was going to be an engineer. And then I turned out to be dyslexic, and that doesn't work with numbers very well. So of course I had these interests, and I had these interests in other worlds. And of course, once you're a biologist and you start studying biology, you're kind of looking into other worlds, looking through a microscope. And that was this whole new world of visually exciting things that you're seeing that you don't normally see. So that was another emphasis, another way as an artist you can get these kind of ideas out to people who aren't normally looking through a microscope to see things. And so I think I started out kind of in two ways with my interest in biology, and one was just sort of a formalist kind of expression of, everything looked like it was underwater or under a microscope or everything, because that was sort of those visual ideas getting out. And then there was the other that was, thinking about diversity and loss of diversity and, and getting that message out. And they were sort of kind of these dual roles that are now sort of combining themselves, I really feel, as I'm getting a little bit older and more mature as an artist.
Okay, one thing I want to just comment that I think all of them bring to the forefront that maybe a lot of folks don't think about is that art and science are not that different. They're not that far apart. And that artists, one reason I love artists is that they can be more expressive sometimes in how they articulate about these issues, and they appeal to our aesthetic sensibilities while still appealing to our conceptual instincts and all of that. And so for those who, like at the public schools, the fact that they put more emphasis on science than art, we don't want that to continue to happen, do we? Because art and science are really about the same thing. They're just different languages, as you so perfectly pointed out. So let's now talk about some of the specific art. I know I'm familiar with all the work that you have in this show, and I've written about it, but I'd like to hear from each of you a little bit about the specific works in the show, and then maybe afterwards the audience might go look at them again and have some new insight into them. So we'll just go in the same sequence since the mic is dictating how we do this. Leanne?
Well, my work began with layering of botanicals. There is a bit of that in one of the pieces involved in the show, but I would pick very different plants. Initially it was visual, then it became more about how divergent they could be, how different their environments can be, the way that they propagate, the altitude that they grow best at, specificity, and then I tried to take the most difficult joinings and put them together into a whole image. Initially that was by layering. Then the piece that you see that's just the graphite, that is the same process of doing research about the disparate plants involved in the drawing and putting them together in a individual manifestation of one single plant growing from one single source. When I do those, typically I try to make them look very cattywampus, as though one piece could fall off. It's a wee bit of a visual house of cards. I try to make them look specimen-y, as though they exist in reality, and they could, I believe, through genetic modification through the technology.
Well, I think that as an artist, you kind of create a pictorial logic that makes them feel like they fit together, but even though they're totally hybrids to the max.
as well as the technological knowledge through different eras of botanical sciences. So I also try to take things that are maybe from the 1500s all the way up to a photograph that I took. So that there's also a visual classing sort of in the way that maybe it's a woodcut that I'm taking the imagery from, so it won't be as accurate as maybe a photograph would be, or the capability of that too. So I also try to have some historical layering going on there, even though in this particular piece it's not layered, but the sources are disparate as well. And then also the disproving of the particular scientific knowledge at that particular time, the assumption that we have that we can contain genetic modification and in fact cut to 100 years from now, and heaven knows, I mean, we already see the pollinating of GMO crops spreading into other areas. The other piece that's in there is a layered one, but I tried to, when I layered my plants, I tried to make it look like they were in flux, and this one is a lot more activated in the fluctuation because all the information on the top layer is specifically derived from the piece on the bottom layer. The directional lines that you see are taken from a book that Charles Darwin and his brother did called The Movement in Plants. And so they scientifically mapped a light source and ended up creating a mapping of the movement within a specific frame of time. What I liked about the sort of movement constellations of those drawings by the plants was that they look like constellations. I mean, if you didn't know their source, there was something great that was sort of removed and way beyond that specific meager little plant. You know, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I really do. In my sort of quiet room in my head, I'm trying to advocate for plants because they're just a little bit slower getting around telling us things than we are. So,
what about the process? I know everything you do is handmade in the end, but can you tell us how digital technology has been affecting your work?
You're not seeing, if you go to Ruiz Healy, you can see further another avenue of this way of thinking over there. I've now started trying to create generations of plants, so I'm sourcing from what I call the genesis plants and then creating another distortion. And so I take the image that I've photographed of the drawing and then put it through a program, stretch it and distort it, and then may clip off some that are still normal looking and a little less gooey looking. And then I end up also taking the images and processing them through a filter that creates color cells. So it distills the visual information into these sort of pure color instead of a gradation of color. It's so for me it represents the vividness of the information that you would find in the DNA of the cell of the plant. So
this piece was a prototype for a large 8-foot sculpture that I did for Sala Diaz back in 2011, based off of a freshwater ecosystem. And Sala Diaz is a house, an old home, and I was thinking about, at that time, kind of infestation, things that creep in and take over, maybe things that you don't necessarily want to take over. So insects was a perfect thing. The sugar ants that come in and sit on your countertop, the fire ants that are in your front yard. But what about an idea? What about something that someone tells you that it just creeps in and you can't get rid of it? And I thought maybe ideologically that could also come into play. So as I was making the prototype, the pieces for it, that's how this came to be. Starting out to figure out how to make the forms and how they go together. I was telling Leanne at lunch, I collect objects. As I told you, I'm interested in social behavior, so I like the narrative. It's something I've always been interested in. The objects that I collect relate to gender identity and roles. The sewing machine is an old sewing machine. I've talked to several people who have said, oh, my grandma had one of those. I used to do that, sew on that, or play with the pedal on the bottom. Collecting these things and having them in my studio, I'm never sure how they're going to relate to the artwork. So, I think by experimentation and chance, sometimes we make work, things infiltrate. You talk to somebody and somehow that plays into the work. I had a student who once told me, great art was like making good wine. You put everything in and then it filters it all out until you get this great clarity. And sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. So as I was working on the piece, I paint it, you set it down on the countertop, and you set it down on the sculpture, you set it down on the paintings, and I set it down on the sewing machine and walked out and had lunch and came back and went, oh, that makes so much sense. It's, I grew up in Naperville, in a small town, and my brother and I used to go out to this pond that was one of the Girl Scout ponds and collect frogs and fish and do all these things. It was just a very, it was a wonderful time. Nature was definitely a part of the everyday experience. So we'd get on our bikes and we wouldn't come home until, 5 o'clock at night, and it was dinner time, and our folks wouldn't worry about us. And we spent all times, I remember dissecting a mouse in a driveway with sticks. It was gross. But we did all these really fun, interesting things, and we're making all this discovery. And when I went back, it wasn't the same. There was a parking lot, the pond had dried up, it had changed. And so this sculpture that represents all those parts includes us as human beings in that system. So it's a small system that relates to a larger system that relates to how we operate even globally. So one small bit moving along. And the books, of course, are open pages without anything on them, so you fill in the story, or perhaps the story is emerging from those blank pages. Right now, I've got a show coming up in September at Southwest School, and I've been working on 3D modeling, taking these forms and working on the computer, and technologically even moving these forms further, and through drawing, exploring this notion of moving DNA or shapes or people or things that we can't grab onto in space. Does that answer that? Okay.
Well, these particular works they're kind of alternative life forms. They're bits of a big sculpture installation that I did at Blue Star in their Gallery 4 in January. And they were always, but they always had kind of this separate life of their own. Like each one is a sort of this alternative creature from, and from there was I called it the Great Trash Reef because of so much trash that's going in the oceans. And so I'm using found trash to create these. And they, as in a reef, there are always these separate little creatures that, kind of go together in this cacophony, which is a music term, but of craziness of all these different things together. And so these are all different bottles bottles, and I think they're mostly bottles. The first one I did on a residency in Berlin, and that was all the fizzy water that I was drinking in Berlin came in these really bright blue bottles. And so I was looking to collect stuff. And I didn't always start out using recycled materials. That was sort of a Homer Simpson moment because I was buying plastic, and the use of the plastic sort of came out of the whole translucency, looking at this lighted image through a microscope and how beautiful that is. And I figured out with the tar gel etching a way of making like clear or translucent, transparent etchings. So bringing my print into that, and so then I they're stretchy and they stick to plastic, so I wanted to stick them on plastic, and I was buying plastic. And it's like, why ever would you have to buy plastic? So then I discovered there's all this free materials, and I can use it, and it makes sense with what I'm doing. You know, medium is the message and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of where these come out of. And the other thing is, of course, there's so much trash going in the oceans, and it's such a tragedy. And it's a good thing, A, for me to pull a little bit out, and so it doesn't have to go be into the you know, landfill or recycled or whatever. And B, it's a way of calling attention to that. And it's sort of, and of course making it beautiful. I always think that, you know, life is going to evolve, it is going to survive in some way or another. And it's going to find a way to use this material, even though right now there's great extinct die-offs and all that kind of things. That's just terrible and tragic.
Margaret, what is a nurdle, and how did you learn about that?
Well, I was just kind of researching, as we all do online, about the plastic, you know, and looking at the you know, the trash islands that are in the gyre, you know, the Great Gyres, which are the currents in the various oceans. And as I was reading about it, they were talking about neurostanic plastic, which are basically, the plastic lasts for a very long time, but when it gets hit with UV and whatever, it starts breaking down into smaller and smaller and smaller bits. And they were calling that nurdles. So, for short for neurostanic, you know, plastic bits. And so, that sort of made sense. So these are, you know, the life is kind of using these plastic bits to continue on. And incidentally, there's an insect, there's a water skater insect that actually does very well because there's all this plastic to lay its eggs on now. So mostly it's detrimental, but there's one or two things that kind of like what we're doing to the environment and are surviving better because of it.
Okay, this next question has more to do with your role as artists who make art that has kind of a social message or a social point to it in a world where, you know, we read a lot about the escalating art market and the emphasis on sales and galleries and all of that. So I've asked you to think, and I hope you've thought about it a little bit about, first of all, are you as artists just preaching to the converted? Do you think, have you had any experience maybe where you've actually seen that your art has impacted someone in truly acting upon what you might be pointing out to them? You know, just in terms of how much can an artist do as a consciousness raiser. So, Leanne, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't really think of my work as being preaching. I think it's an observation. So I just hope that people end up looking at it, thinking about what it's representing, and therefore become curious. So I don't see mine as being an active, in-your-face thing. That's also a big part of mine. I make them beautiful because I want them to be beguiling in the sense of like, look at what we can do when you kind of get Frankensteinian drunk with your own ability to be able to manipulate things in such a way, technologically, through genetic modification. And I mean, you know, the Jurassic Park movie's out, and everybody's talking about how you can't really revive a woolly mammoth, but you can end up mixing it with a current day elephant and getting a hybrid of that. And that just the very idea of actually being able to do that is sort of thrilling, and kind of, as I'm listening to it, going, ooh, why? You know, but just because, the thrill of being able to do it, that kind of childlike lack of responsibility, just I think is maybe something I hope people come away with the work, by looking at how you can be drawn into something gorgeous and it's a train wreck after the fact of getting to know it better and seeing what it does and the destruction in its path. I mean, and that is partly why I end up doing the generational pieces, because I want people to see just how unlike it was from the one before it, how far distorted it can get to it. So you almost have to kind of keep paying attention to the different bodies of work that I do for different exhibitions or institutions, because it's just a paragraph in the larger sort of chapter of what I'm doing. So you have to pay attention. It's sort of quietly trying to tell you something. It's a whisper, a bit of a whisper.
Well, and at some point, hopefully, we'll have your catalog resume, and then we can really study it in great detail, right? Okay, Jayne, your thoughts on your role as an artist in the context of what happens after, after the art's left you, and how it may impact others?
We need a time machine. I think it's easy as an artist when all your friends, you look out the audience and see a lot of you out there, that you feel like you're preaching to the crowd, that the people that come are other artists or people who are collecting, and they know the story. They have an insight into what you do. But I think each one of us who makes something, who creates something, is asking you to look at the world from a different point of view. When you walk in, can you leave the gallery somewhat changed? Did we do something that interested you enough that tweaked the way you look at things just a little bit? So I think there is that when you talk about, am I preaching to the crowd? But I think the other thing as an artist, as we're all advocates for education, where you do workshops for kids. When you talk about nature in this exhibition, I mean, there's your avenue, education and talking about things that are colorful or playful or multi-layered, or deal with the plastic that you deal with as trash. When you can look and influence generations, that's not the crowd, that's everybody. That's who's going to be responsible for the world that we live in. So I think making those changes in artists is hugely important, and I'm an advocate for arts in education. I think that it is mandatory and extremely necessary to be asked. So anyway.
Well, first off, I hope, if you look at mine and you see the plastic containers, maybe you'll think about using a reusable plastic container to take your lunch to work rather than a bunch of plastic bags. But that's just a little thing. I think what these guys have said, I would sort of ditto that. I mean, we're all about the education. I think the one thing is that so many of us are saying it. And when you have so many people kind of talking about the subject matter, maybe it's not just any one artist that's going to get the message across, but I think it's got to be a crowd source for environmentalism, that sort of thing, of getting a whole, if you have so many people talking about it as artists, that's going to be that many more people who are reaching it, and that many more people who are going to reach those people and go out. And so I don't see I'm necessarily talking to the choir, and I would hope I'm also saying it in a slightly different way. So where you go and you see all the different voices in this exhibition, and so it's a group sort of conversation, and that group conversation hopefully extends beyond just these walls.
Can I make a comment? So you better get a warehouse for trash, It's like, as I look at your pieces, I think, I could save that bottle, or maybe Margaret could use that. If we all did that, you'd be in trouble.
Well, actually, the point that Margaret just made about the kind of larger dialogue leads me into the next question that I asked them to think about, because I've lived and worked in a number of different cities that have artist communities, and there's something very wonderful about the nature of community and how that affects artists. And San Antonio is one of those, I think, very lucky places, because there's so many, teaching institutions here where artists can get their degrees and whatnot, but also I think it's embedded in the culture and it's embedded in the history of San Antonio. And so I've asked them to think about, let's see, how did I word this? this is a collective dialogue, as was just pointed out. There are all these different voices. I mean, the way this show came together was I started thinking about what I'd been seeing as, you know, all the times I go out to exhibitions around town and see what artists are doing, and I saw this connection. So I wanted them to think and talk to you a little bit about that connection among the artists, what it is to have a community where there's this kind of cross-fertilization. How are you as artists affected by the fact that you live and work in a town where there are a lot of other artists? And how does that affect your creativity and maybe your opportunities as well?
Well, you had mentioned cactus broth. I think that the grassroots cactus row was never about making a profit. It was about letting people experiment in a 16 by 16 foot space. I think that is a big reason to live in San Antonio. You know, it's people, once that went away, gobs of other spaces popped up because there's this wonderful grassroots, very strong, rapid running underneath the city where people will just make it happen because the actual Bihl House, you know, I mean, I'm sure Kellen makes some money, but she probably has to get by with funding so that she can keep doing this, giving the artists an opportunity to show. And so the community is always kind of together on giving each other chances, you know, to do something terrific with a grubby little space, you know, that has beer stains on the floor and scuff marks of shoes where people leaned against the wall watching a performance, you know, of something that somebody's just working out. So I think that sense of collective support carries through people to kind of see through their most outlandish ideas, really, that they can end up having a decent dialogue. The one thing I would love is that, you know, you don't hear the comment. I wish people would come up to you a little more readily and tell you what they think about your work instead of hearing about it from someone else. That's my hope, but say, oh, let me have it. Got a show right now, you can tear me a new one.
But I do think we have a really interesting dialogue. So yeah, I'm sure, other than a few of us, and you don't come up to somebody and say, oh, by the way, what you can improve today is, why don't you work on this? So we don't have a critical assessment, I think, among each other. I do, yeah. I think we could use a little bit more of that. But I do think we have a really good open dialogue about ideas. And Leanne mentioned cactus, and I think that was one of the reasons, and now all the other grassroots organizations and even the institutions now coming up with all kinds of programs. It is about that dialogue. You want to get out there and have artists come in. I think having artists come in and visit and talk about their work also creates an open forum and an open dialogue for people that aren't artists to come in and share. And San Antonio, I've lived a lot of places, and I was telling these guys the other day, it's like a nexus. I think San Antonio, to make art, is an amazing place. Like, there's something about this place that I think is very generative as far as ideas, and I think it's very unusual. I've never been in a place like this. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I would add to that makes San Antonio kind of a nexus is because we do have the meetings of the Latino culture and the sort of more basic, generic United States culture, and that leads to a really interesting dialogue between work and ideas. The other thing that I noticed, because I lived in Austin for 6 years before coming to San Antonio, and Austin was so damn expensive. And one of the things that leads to so many artists here is the fact that you don't have to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head. You can actually work 1 job and, you know, and rent a little space for a studio as well as, you know, keeping a roof over your head. And that just physically, financially allows there to be artists here and artists living here. And maybe there's just something about the people here that I've always really felt supportive. You know, everybody is kind of supportive of each other. And maybe we could personally think a little bit more about how we improve or what, you know, be more critical of ourselves, but at the same time that I wouldn't give up that support and people not being backstabbing or, you know, trying to get the better of each other or anything like that. Just having two artists, these two who started Cactus Bra, you know, as a place for other artists, I took advantage of it, and I took advantage of it to, you know, do something crazy like building a false wall and having, you know, my own sort of biological black holes, which made it, you know, that was a space I could do that in. I couldn't do that in, you know, a commercial gallery. There's nothing for sale in that. So I think having all those spaces really helps and really leads to having this community.
There's also something about making work where you're not worried about the sale. You're not worried about it as a commodity, you're worried about it as an idea. There's something you have to say and you need to get it out there. And I think that's really what we do. Not that we wouldn't like you to buy our work, please, it is available for sale. but
that a lot of spaces still do. I mean, it's not with 3 walls gone, Solid Diaz is still carrying on a good fight, but they're managing to do it through funding.
Right.
You know, I mean, but I think spaces still are affordable enough to where collectives can get together and kind of still give us terrific opportunities, to the point where there's so many that I feel like I'm almost out of touch, which I think is a great thing.
So what I think you're all saying is one of the benefits of having all these alternative spaces, many of which are artist-run, is that that actually helps feed the dialogue, that helps generate the dialogue, and that's kind of like the fertilizer that grows the plants that is our artist community. So anyway, we are very fortunate in that regard, and if I think many of you here probably are familiar with the scene, but if you're not, you know, check it out. And for example, tonight is second Saturday of the month. There's always a lot going down in the Lone Star Art District on the second Saturday of the month. Now this next question is just kind of an off-the-wall one that I really wanted to see what they would, you don't remember? to see what they would say. So we'll start with Leanne again. What are your predictions for the future of the planet?
My dark black heart would burn all of your brains if you really knew what I thought. It's pretty cynical, unfortunately. So you think that I would be a little more forthcoming with my art about it. I think basically we'll get ours, you know. The earth will take care of us in a way we aren't expecting, and you can read that as positive or negative.
Okay.
the little green men are going to come and get us, and no. I think as long as we keep doing what we're doing in the positive way, hopefully it'll outweigh the negative, and so I'm an optimist, so, you know, I hope we'll be around for a while, and I'm going to lie and say it's all going to be good.
Well, I'm going to mention a couple of theories that I've heard. One was we had to read a book and I can't remember the name of it, but basically the guy was postulating that we are all just a logical way. Their universe's purpose is to expel energy and have energy burnt up, and we are just a logical way, like centrifugal force. If you use centrifugal force to can get water out of a bottle much faster than if you just try and dump it out. And we're just the universe's way of doing that. The other one was posed by a good friend of mine, Sean Ward, who said that, well, we're kind of like this species that once we grow too big and we completely have used up all the resources, we're going to get ready and move someplace else to use up more resources again. And that one sort of fits with my being a science geek and a fantasy science fiction reader for all of my life. And so basically we're the mosquitoes who have, you know, used up this particular pond and we're moving on to another. And as we're going to need to do that, our technology is beginning to, you know, make us be able to get off the planet. So that's just a silly one. But I'm kind of in the feeling that life is going to adapt, we just may not be what we wanted to adapt to. I've done work thinking about Bad Birds was a big series of mine. It's these creatures that are optimists, and we have tons and tons of them. And we all hate them, or people love to hate grackles, and people love to hate, of course, cockroaches. But they're the things that are opportunists, and they survive with the biggest opportunists of them all, which is human beings. So.
Well, no, actually, I'm more or less actually more aligned, I think, with what Jayne said. I mean, I tend to be an optimist, and I also believe in the power of will and the power of energy, because I think will is a form of energy. And I think some of the work in this show kind of says that as well. You know, certainly Elizabeth Eloquin's painting, which actually helped her get over, you know, after she had survived surgery for a brain tumor and all of that. I mean, working with that psychedelic palette, really, the energy of all that color, you know, helped her get well. And I do believe very much in the healing power of aesthetics and, or a visual form. And so, and also, you know, I mean, part of me is stoic and part of me is optimistic, but I'm certainly not a pessimist. So, and that's maybe why we do projects like this, is just so that we can look at it and still, you know, try to find our way to the next step so that we preserve the human race. And I guess, you know, then it gets into other areas like politics, and we won't go there today. But I did want to give the audience a chance to ask you guys some questions. So who from the audience has something they'd like to ask about? Hopefully somebody does. Anybody? Okay.
Such a good job, David.
Okay, well anyway, then thank you all. Thank you, Margaret, Jayne, and Leanne, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you all for coming.
Just one quick note, we do have the catalogs for the exhibition. This is, we are so proud of this publication. The catalog design is by Thelma Murada. David did an amazing essay for the catalog. These are $10, and purchase of these helps support this kind of programming. Thank you all so much for coming. The artists are here. Please, they're available to ask questions personally afterwards. We have food, wine, help yourselves, enjoy the exhibit, and thank you so much for coming.